Cyno was released with a ton of hype and build-up since he was included in one of the original Genshin trailers. On release, however, his gameplay quirks and lack of synergistic teammates made him one of the most regretted characters to summon out of any 5-star of all time. Since then, he's gotten a lot better, and with Furina around, his power just shot up to an all-time high, bringing him up to, at least in my opinion, on par with most of the other top-tier DPSs in the game. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. Cyno is an on-field DPS and electro applicator with a high degree of synergy with Dendro reaction. He does damage on his electro infusion state he gets during his burst, and by doing special combos by using his skill when the eye appears on the screen. Personally, I find this playstyle extremely fun and engaging. It's just so satisfying to see that big eye turn gold. His other passive gives him a pretty nice bonus for building elemental mastery, which further helps his Dendro synergies. He does have an extremely long field time, which somewhat limits the perfect synergies he can have. It does have the small upside of giving him a longer rotation to one-cycle enemies or waves with, but it makes most multi-wave or multi-phase content or stalling bosses a little more painful than usual most of the time. That being said, he often makes up for it with huge amounts of damage using the very powerful reactions and synergies that he has, and there are ways you can play around it. Again, although his synergies are not that wide, they are very strong, and using a character that synergizes well with the best characters in the game is always going to make for a team that can swing with the best. He does have a little bit of interruption in his kit, but it's not a huge amount, so it's pretty easy to get knocked around when you're using your combos. It's advised to play him with someone like that. The main key to mastering Cyno starts with having a team that can support him. So let's talk about his teams first. The latest and greatest and best overall Cyno team, in my opinion, is the Furina Quick Bloom team. If you're going to use Furina with Cyno, you pretty much have to have Baiju. There's really no other alternative. Yaoya's healing doesn't last long enough and it isn't big enough. Your aura doesn't heal at all. Baiju is pretty much a staple, which is unfortunate because all three of these characters are in this patch, but it is what it is. Nahida, ironically, is the most flexible out of at least this composition. You can replace her with Dendro main character, but of course, Nahida's elemental mastery buff is actually really relevant on this team. All the pieces on this team come together really nicely. So of course, Furina is going to be providing the hydro and also buffing the damage of the rest of your team. So Nahida's damage is actually pretty relevant. So getting a big boost from Furina is nice. You'll definitely want to go with an elemental mastery goblet on Nahida on this team. That way you can pass a bigger elemental mastery buff to Cyno. And then Furina is also passing Cyno an elemental damage bonus buff. So Cyno's hyper blooms are getting buffed by Nahida, and his regular raw damage from Quicken is getting buffed by Furina. Meanwhile, Baiju is buffing all Dendro related reaction damage and providing the healing for the team, and Furina's personal damage on this team is really good. In addition, Baiju's healing actually lasts almost the whole Cyno rotation, and if you happen to take some damage at the end, not a big deal because Baiju's healing is so big. Nahida's skill also lasts an incredibly long time. The only problem is in multi-wave scenarios, which we talked about, where Nahida's skill can't be reapplied unless you switch back onto Nahida, and then you lose Cyno's uptime. It's much less of a big deal on this team in particular because Baiju's still providing at least some Dendro for some Quicken and some Hyper Bloom uptime, and Furina's buff keeps chugging along and her damage keeps chugging along. So even if you're not getting the Nahida stuff, Nahida's buff is still active, you're still getting some Dendro, and your damage loss just isn't nearly as bad as on other teams. So overall, in my opinion, definitely the best Cyno team. It's the one you want to work towards if you want to max out your Cyno, but it is far from the only good team that he has. A different, also premium version is with Zhongli as your defensive option. This one obviously won't work with Furina because you don't have a healer, and you also are even more susceptible to lacking Dendro uptime for multi-wave content. But the trade-off is that the team is very, very comfy because you do have some interruption resistance and mitigation from Baiju, but you have even more with Zhongli. The Omni Shred is synergistic with this team. Overall, it's a great choice, but not quite as versatile, and still makes Cyno's weaknesses more pronounced than the other one. Oh yeah, I forgot, you also get the elemental mastery buff from Dendro Resonance with Nahida and Baiju. So that gives you more elemental mastery for your Cyno, which gives you more hyper bloom damage. If you have his weapon, then that kind of spirals into even more damage. Really, really good. You can obviously switch out Yelan for Sing Cho here, not a big deal at all. Nahida is much less replaceable on this team because she's the only source of Dendro, so you're really gonna feel it if you switch to anyone else. You definitely feel it on this team too, but it's not quite as big of a deal as this team. Cyno's Quicken variants are very underrated. Yes, you don't get full uptime on Fischl because Fischl's skill doesn't last Cyno's whole duration, but while she is active, she she still does a ton of damage, and she really helps with Cyno's energy regen. In chambers where you need to group with someone like Kazuha, this is often going to be the best choice to go for, even over the Hyper Bloom, because Kazuha is so broken. It does again have that weakness for multi-wave scenarios. The ways to mitigate that with this team is either by finishing off or just deleting low HP targets with just the Fischl Baizhu Kazuha core and not going into Cyno's full burst animation. Or if you do have to swap off of Cyno's full burst animation early, then you can stay on the Fischl Baizhu Kazuha core, getting aggravates from Kazuha longer and using just more skills of Kazuha and more skills of Fischl, more skills of Baizhu to generate more energy for Cyno to build him back up. Often in multi-wave scenario, the enemies are pretty squishy and they generate a lot of particles, so you won't lose as much damage as you think. That's something you can do, and that I have done, is to finish off an enemy instead of going into a whole Cyno burst. I'm just using Furina's skill, Nahida's skill, Baiju's skill, and then some occasional skills with Cyno just to proc a few Hyper Blooms here and there. And along with the Furina personal damage and Nahida personal damage, that is often more than enough to finish off low HP enemies, so that again, you're making up for his weaknesses. The weaknesses he has are real and they're noticeable, but there are ways to play around them, and I just want to make sure I communicate that. The next team is not what you think. This is not a Cyno Burgeon team. This is a Hyper Bloom team that uses Toma's Burning. Sorry, this should be Nahida here. This is a Hyper Bloom team that uses Toma's Burning to actually get more quicken uptime. So you're going to get Burning, Vaporize, you're going to maybe get the occasional Burning, but you're actually building Toma on a shield build. Maybe with Katanes, you have some elemental mastery here and there. Xingqiu's less damage than Yelan on this team, but he's more comfortable since the shield stack. But Yelan definitely can be used to improve the team's overall DPS. Very good team. The hardest part about it is the energy requirement, but this is another great option, especially if you don't have Zhongli. You kind of do need Nahida for this variant because you need all the Dendro app you can get. You can swap out Toma for Kuki. This team is a bit sus because you're basically just putting Cyno on field in a team that's already very strong with the Hyper Bloom core. It's still very strong, but it's sort of like why? It's kind of redundant in terms of Cyno, but it is a very strong team, and if you have this built, you can go for it. But Alhaitham is going to be better in Cyno slot. Fischl is often better in Cyno slot because then you can use Nahida on field. Xingqiu could be better in Cyno slot, but if you're trying to build a great Cyno team, this one performs really well. It does have one benefit, and a really good benefit I might add, as being very good in multi-wave scenarios, because you don't always have to pop Cyno's burst, or if you're waiting to charge it up, you have a 3-man core that can deal great damage. And of course, we can't forget the classic Electrocharge. Beidou Xingqiu provide a ton of damage mitigation and interruption resistance stacked on top of Cyno. You're basically indestructible in terms of preventing from being knocked around. If you take too much damage, you don't have a healer, so you have to be a bit careful. The biggest issue with that is if Xingqiu's and Beidou's bursts expire and you're still on field with Cyno taking damage, that can be dangerous here because you don't have a healer to fix you up. But very strong team. Not the strongest taser team by any means, but it is a very strong and comfy team. There's obviously way more teams you can run with Cyno. Let me know what your favorites, or if I missed any really good ones in the comments. I'll correct anything that you guys say in the pinned comment that I got wrong. Moving on to the build guide, starting with level, it is very, very, very important that you level 90 your Cyno. You get a 30% damage increase from going from 80 to 90 for both your Hyper Blooms and for your Aggravates. So it's like team-wide damage. It's a massive, massive increase going from 80 to 90. So don't skim. Make sure you do it. For weapons, obviously, his best is going to be the Staff of the Scarlet Sands. Incredible weapon for him. Very good synergy. One of the better 5-star weapon upgrades that you can get. If you're truly a Cyno main, eventually you're probably going to want to go for this weapon. But if he's just one of the characters you're building, you can very much get away with either the Primordial Jadewing Spear or the Staff Homa. The Jadewing Spear, actually, he is one of the better users for the staff because he makes a lot of hits in his burst. He is actually going to get the passive fairly stacked up. One of the few characters that can actually do it. Some nice crit rate is great for building him. Overall, awesome weapon. Staff of Homa, almost equal damage to Jadewing Spear here. Other 5-star weapons, not as good of choices. You don't want the ER from Engulfing Lightning. Calamity Queller's okay, but just getting attack is not that great. Vortex Vanquisher is all right if you're using Zhongli, but still not that great. Skyward Spine, you don't really want the ER. So the other ones can be fine, but not super good. For 4-star options, he doesn't have the best free-to-play 4-star option. Either Battle Pass weapon is good. The brand new Battle of the Fjords is going to be his best 4-star choice if you have access to it, and it scales very, very well through refinement. It's going to get pretty darn close to the Staff of Homa and Jadewing Spear when you get closer to refinement 5. I think it just slightly edges them out when you get to the high refinement. I haven't ever seen a theory crafter calc the prospector's drill, but attack percent and elemental damage bonus when he's healed. If you're playing him on a team with Baiju, the prospector's drill is going to be a good 4-star choice. I doubt it's better than the Jadewing Spear or the Homa. Refinements are going to scale well with that weapon. I definitely wouldn't bother if you're at low refinement. Missive Wind Spear is his best free-to-play option if you have it from the event. You can't get it anymore, so if you don't have it, Kitane Crosspear is all right. It can fix the energy needs that he has, and it gives elemental mastery, so pretty good for him. Not insane. If you don't have his, it's the best unconditional free-to-play option, like not in events, not in limited time. And what I mean by limited time, not limited time, but his actual best free-to-play is the White Tassel, is slightly better. But if you've already fed your White Tassels like I have, because it's a 3-star weapon and you can only get a certain amount through chests in Leeway, then Kitane Crosspear is going to be your choice. It's a pretty noticeable downgrade from Battle of the Fjord, Staff of Homa, Jadewing Spear, and his signature, but it's still going to perform well enough. You just want to make sure that you invest well into your other stats. For talents, your burst has the highest priority, being where most of his damage comes from. His skill is second. They give you big mini nukes of damage, so it's definitely worth leveling them both up. They're very, very close in terms of damage. I would aim to get both of them to 9 and 9. He's not one of the characters that's super high value from crowning, because Quicken and Hyper Bloom don't come from talent levels, but he still does a lot of personal talent damage, so you don't want to neglect them. For artifact sets, he has 2 really great choices, actually 3 now with Farina. The best overall option is going to be the Thundering Fury set. It does require a specific combo to make it the best, but I don't think the combo is particularly difficult. I'll tell you what it is in a minute, and especially if you don't have his signature, this is going to be his best in slot option. It even increases the Hyper Bloom damage he does, as well as his Electrocharge, Super Gunning, so it's just a very good generalist set for him. If you're playing an Aggravate, technically Thunder Soother is something you can do. I don't know if I foddered all my Thunder Soother pieces. Here's one. I mean, yeah, technically something you can do, but it's only good for the Quicken teams, not for the Hyper Bloom teams, so generally not recommended at all. Gilded Dreams is the set that you want to go for if you have his signature weapon, or if you just have a really good Gilded Dreams set and don't have a good Thundering Fury set. It's very, very close, and it is better than Thundering Fury if you don't do his optimal combo. So if you're a bit more of a masher, this set might be for you. You really can't go wrong with either. You can go for Gladiators. He does take advantage of the 4-piece set, so it is a good option if you just have a cracked Gladiator set for him. And finally, of course, if you're using him with Farina, the Mariachi Band is very, very strong. Just be careful if you do have his signature or a different crit rate weapon. It can be very easy to overcap on crit with this set with him if you also have that crit rate weapon, but he does take advantage of the 2-piece and the 4-piece. The 2-piece, not as much, because a lot of his damage comes from the skill, but he at least gets some value. And overall, when you're using with Farina, a good set for him, I would personally go for either Gilded Dreams or Thundering Fury over this set, just because it's more consistent. You might not always be running him with Farina, whereas this set means you basically have to. Obviously, you can go 2-piece, but he gets a fair bit of damage from the 4-piece effect, so only use that as a stopgap in the meantime. For main stats, you pretty much always want to go with an Elemental Mastery Sans if you can. Attack Sans is not going to be nearly as good, because obviously all his reactions scale off of EM, but also he has a passive that gives him more damage for the EM he has. Plus, if you do have his weapon, you get even more value from EM. So yeah, EM Sans. I will put an honorable mention. I know I might get flamed for this, but an Energy Recharge Sans is not the worst thing in the world. If you have like no ER subs at all, ER Sans would be kind of nice. It's very comfy. If you have a well-invested Cyno with good artifact, ER Sans can just make things chug along really, really comfortably. 51 ER is more ER than Cyno needs, however, so you probably are wasting damage. But if you have no ER subs versus using an ER versus using ER Sans, which gives you some, like, sometimes you may struggle to get his burst up. So I'll just throw it in there. Not like strictly advisable, but it's something you can do if you have to. Speaking of ER, I do want to speak about that. Like, how much EM do you need? How much ER do you need? The answer is as much EM as possible. Like, you want your EM Sans, and then EM substats are very good. I happen to have a really cracked out Cyno. Almost all of my pieces have Elemental Mastery on them. I have a good Elemental Mastery Sans, so my Cyno slaps. Like, I'm not gonna lie, he feels amazing. I never struggle to play Cyno in the Abyss, and I don't even have his weapon. I use either the Deathmatch or the Jadewing Spear. And for ER, I have no ER sub, so that's how I know. What I will do is, I was actually testing something out, so I actually use a different goblet than I am using here with 11% ER. It's not enough. I would prefer 120, 125 ER, and that's on a team where I'm using Fav Baiju and Fav Farina, and it's just barely not enough ER with 112%. So you can benchmark that for yourself. ER is a tricky thing. I like to give a general range, and then you need to test it out for yourself, because you can't pick the amount of ER. There's no slider you can pick to get the optimal amount. You have to play around with it. So Fav on Farina, Fav on Baiju. If I had another Fav Codex, maybe I would go Fav on Nahida, and then this would be perfect. Triple Fav. If you have lots of ER subs, or if you're going with an ER Sans, you can obviously ditch the ER, ditch the Fav on, definitely don't run Fav Nahida if you're doing that, and get the most out of her damage. You kind of do want to do that, right? You want to get the most out of the damage. But I would generally recommend 120 to 140 ER for Cyno. You might, when I use him with Fischl and Fav Kazuha, I don't need any ER, obviously. But for Hyper Bloom teams, especially when I'm not using Kuki for the Electro Resonance, yeah, I wish I had 125 to 135 ER, but you want to play around with it and figure it out for yourself. For constellations and vertical investment, I think you're going to get a bit more bang for your buck going with Farina C2 or Nahida C2 before you invest vertically into your Cyno. Not only are they more universal, but they improve the overall team damage by a lot. However, Cyno does have a really good weapon and a really good C2. So if you are going to invest vertically, I mean, personally, I would go for these two first, then investing into Cyno C2. But if you just really love Cyno, it's not going to be a waste going for his weapon and going for his C2. I would personally go for his weapon before his constellations. You definitely, when you start getting his constellations, your C1 kind of changes the combos he uses. So when you get his weapon, when you get his constellations, his artifact set, I think it's just more favorable to go for Gilded Dreams. Correct me if I'm wrong, I will correct it in the comments, but from everything I've seen and people I've talked to, you're better off going for Gilded Dreams when you start vertically investing. But at C0, Thundering Fury is your best set, but I'll let the Cyno mains correct me and I'll correct it in the pinned comment. So I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about Cyno's best combo, because unlike other characters, you are going to benefit a lot more than most for actually getting those proper combos off. All right, so for Cyno's combos, I wanted to demo it, but it got a bit confusing. So I think that this is going to be easier. I know it might look a little bit intimidating, but hear me out. Both of these say the same thing. I'll just walk you through what I mean. For his Thundering Fury combo, you want to start with your skill going into your burst. So you funnel some particles. You want to normal attack once or twice, and then you want to skill basically as soon as you can. Then you want to mash normal attack until your skill is off cooldown and you use your skill. Then the eye will come up and you're going to be able to get your eye skill just in time. Then you're going to mash normal attack again. You will get the cooldown for another skill, but you want to wait until your eye comes up and then do the eye skill, because if you use it early, you won't have enough time to get both a skill in between and then not miss the timing for the eye skill. Then you want to mash normal attack some more into regular skill, into eye skill, and then eye skill again. You can't fit one in between. So overall, once you're in your burst state, it looks something like this. It's skill, skill, eye skill, eye skill, skill, eye skill, eye skill, and you want to mash normal attacks all in between. Hopefully that's clear. Basically, if you're using Gilded Dreams, you just want to be using your skill when you have the eye up. Let me just test something. Yeah, for non-Thundering Fury, you can fit one extra skill in before, but after that, you're pretty much just going to be using his eye skill. Part of me feels like you might be able to fit another skill in here. Let me know in the comments if you can, or if this is the best you can kind of do. I know you can further optimize this by talking about what normal attack combo you're going to do and a dash cancel and all that stuff, but I gotta be honest, there's a limit to how much I can do combos. This is actually really easy and smooth, and you get into a nice rhythm once you're doing it. But calculating how many normal attacks I'm doing, I'm not about that life, but you can definitely check out other creators or the Cyno mains in the comments to find out further optimization for these combos. But this will be more than enough to help you max out your Cyno, at least get very close. For further gameplay optimizations, I talked about a lot of different ones, other gameplay optimizations in the team section. So if you missed those, go back and check that out in the time card. So what about Cyno's value, his power level, and how he stacks up against other Electro characters and other characters in general? I would say his power level is very high. As I alluded to at the beginning of the video, I think he is, when you have his premium team with Farina, Nahida, Baiju, I think his power level is right up just next to Alhaitham, and I'm serious. Maybe it is a bit lower, but if you give Cyno his weapon, maybe now, and you give both of them their weapon, maybe then now they're right up close. I do think overall, Alhaitham is the better character, but in terms of power level, it's really close, man. He's right up there. He's right up there with the top DPSs. This team is cracked, really, really good. Right up there with Hu Tao, right up there with Ayaka, right up there with Raiden. All of these characters have their downsides. Yes, Cyno is weak to multi-wave content. There's ways you can mitigate it. It's not perfect. Maybe because of that, you put him slightly below, but I think his power level is right up there, man. It's really, really close. For value, it's a different story. Value, there's other characters you can use in these spots. You don't need an Electro on-fielder for your hyper bloom teams, for your quick bloom teams. You just don't. You have off field, you have Kuki, you have Fischl for just electro in general. Raiden is another great electro DPS. You have Yaimiko for quicken, you have Kaching for quicken, you even have Lisa for quicken. Like, you don't need Cyno for quicken, you don't need Cyno for hyper bloom or for quick bloom. There's lots of different options. For quick bloom, you also have Alhaitham. Like, Alhaitham is, you know, overall slightly better character, and he can also use Furina. He can use this same team, except you put Kuki instead of Baiju here and give Nahida some prototype Amber, and you're away to the races. Like, Cyno is a very strong pull, but I don't think he's a super valuable pull. He's not a character you get just to strengthen your account. He's a character you get because you think he's cool. But I think that if you build him well and play him well, like, you can't be disappointed in his power. He has a strong power. Now, if you're disappointed with his playstyle, or you wish he had infinite interruption resistance, you know, then you should get Raiden. And like, there's a reason why Raiden is my favorite DPS in the game. It's because your infinite interruption resistance, her big new burst damage, reducing ER needs of your team. Like, Raiden's my favorite DPS in the game. I'm not advocating that Cyno is like that insane and is my favorite DPS in the game or something, but he's very strong, he's very fun, and I think he's pretty darn underrated. For future prospects, I think we finally hit the final form of Cyno teams. I think it's possible that there is an alternative to Fischl maybe in the future that lasts longer, and so he'll have more options. Maybe there's a future Animo unit that heals or provides interruption resistance or gives more off-field crowd control that can give him more quicken options as replacements to Kazuha. I don't see there being a ton of like upgrades. I do see there being more side grades. Who knows? Maybe there's an Animo option that's a healer, that's a grouper, that's, I don't know, maybe there'll be interruption resistance in the future Animo that can replace Baiju. Maybe you get some Electro and Hydro swirls, and maybe that makes up for the less Dendro application, and you get some swirls on your Hydro and Electro in addition to the Dendro, but then you're competing against the Dendro aura. Might be scuffed, but it might be good. I don't know. Who knows? I think that it's possible, but we're no longer waiting for those great supports. We have great supports with Furina, Nahida, and Baiju now. And finally, for Overworld and aesthetic, like, obviously Cyno has one of the coolest aesthetics in the game. I love it a lot. And for Overworld, the main thing you want to do for Cyno is just make sure that you really give him a ton of ER. I think that for the Overworld, it's possible that you even go for an ER weapon and maybe even an ER sand, so that you can use your burst just non-stop all the time. Enemies in the Overworld are squishy. You are not going to lose a lot by going ER. For the Overworld, it's annoying to switch between ER and Elemental Mastery and other good weapons for the Abyss, but for the Overworld, like, you're gonna have more than enough damage, and I really would recommend a Favonius Lance and ER Sands for the Overworld. You'll have a much better time than trying to go full damage. You don't want that for the Overworld, so that's what I recommend. If you want to know whether this banner is worth pulling, check out my banner guide here and subscribe to see my Ayato video. Take care. Bye for now.